the presidency yet to explain the standoff at the Warsaw Chopin Airport. A South African delegation, you'll remember, accompanying President Cyril Ramaphosa on this African peace mission to Russia and Ukraine, was detained in the Polish capital, Warsaw. Now, the detention of the delegation included the more than 100 presidential protection personnel and about 20 journalists. Let's get yet more reaction to this story, and we talk now to fellow journalist and author Rebecca Davis, who speaks to us via the virtual platform. Rebecca, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. The primary reason for inviting you to this discussion is because of the thought-provoking piece that you have written, and its headline is absolutely, it takes us straight to the point of what it is that you discuss in the piece. And we kick off this conversation with what you say is selective outrage on the grounding of the second plane that was to go to this mission, which of course would have been the delegation of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Why the use of those words, selective outrage?
Thanks for having me, Xoli. Well, I guess I keep coming back to the point, what would happen if this exact scenario played out with journalists and security officials from a Western country? And it just struck me as so strange watching the reactions come in over the past few days, from political parties, from journalists, from commentators, who seem to be bending over backwards to justify Poland's actions, to say immediately, without really any information on the table, well, it's obvious we must have screwed up. There's no question South Africa did something bad here. So Poland was obviously justified in holding us hostage for 26 hours on the tarmac. And now we need to find out why we messed up so badly and probably also say a very big sorry to Poland. But something about that narrative is just bizarre to me. It really is. Because of the fact that there are so few facts known at this stage, but also because even on the face of the facts that are known, to ground a plane in this manner, when six, well, it's supposed to be more even, African heads of state are heading to an active war zone, and on that plane is weaponry and support staff for that mission. This is a highly, highly questionable diplomatic incident, in my opinion, and it is really strange to me that there isn't more outrage over what Poland has done. It makes me feel, let's have some self-respect here.
So let's go to the heart of the matter then, Rebecca, because I suppose the central question here is, did the Polish authorities discriminate against this delegation because there were black Africans on this plane? Is that the sum total of the argument?
So here's the thing. What commentators have been saying is it's very likely that South Africa messed up the paperwork required to bring this volume of weapons into Europe and through Poland to Ukraine and Russia. It's also possible that Warsaw, the government in Warsaw, is angered by Pretoria's stance on the war, namely South Africa's apparent coziness with Russia. But what people seem to be very, very quick to dismiss is the possibility that racism could come into this. And we saw this when Ramaphosa's chief bodyguard, Major General Rueda, gave this slightly extraordinary press conference where he sort of ranted on the tarmac about racism. Now, was he attempting to deflect from the fact that South Africa probably messed up the logistical arrangements? Sure, quite possibly. But nonetheless, is it also highly likely that there was an element of racism in Poland's treatment of South Africa? Equally, yes, very much so. Xoli, what people forget is that Poland, and I realize this is a bold claim, but I stand by it, is famously one of the most racist places on earth. So when Poland was attempting to join the European Union for the first time, that was 15 years ago, Poland's racism was already considered so problematic that it almost became a stumbling block to Poland joining the EU. We know racism is a massive problem throughout Eastern Europe, very much including Russia, very much including Ukraine. But Poland has perhaps an even more special premium on racism, and that goes from the government to society. In fact, things have worsened in recent years because the ruling Law and Justice Society, which came to power about 6 years ago, came to power on an explicitly anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, frankly racist platform, and has since moved Polish society further to the right. Hate crimes, racist incidents are absolutely routine in Poland. And if you want some kind of evidence for the fact that Poland may be racistly disposed towards African people, consider the fact that when the conflict broke out between Ukraine and Russia in February 2022, African students fleeing across the border to Poland were treated appallingly. They were subjected to racist abuse, racist attacks even. And that was at a point, Xoli, where Poland had no idea what our stance on the war was. You know, they couldn't say, oh, well, we did that because we're so upset by how Pretoria is, cozying up to Russia. That was just good old-fashioned prejudice playing out. So it is really bizarre to me to see people so quick to dismiss the possibility that racism played a part in our treatment by this country and by a notoriously far-right regime.
And we're going to, you spark a memory now that I suppose one would have stored in the back of their minds, and that is at the start of this war. You actually take us back to that moment when blacks were literally pushed off the train as they were, or I think it was buses, I should say. They were pushed off those buses because everyone was trying to flee Ukraine at the time. And this happened at the Ukraine-Poland border. But let's track back. Let's track back, Rebecca, to what you are saying is a very explicitly racist regime that is leading that country right now. I want for you to listen to a recount of what happened to this delegation. And these are the words of Govin Whittles, one of our journalists, who was on that plane. This is now after hours being kept on that plane. I think it was about 20 hours at this time. So they are eventually let inside the airport. Because remember, the story they are told is that documentation is wrong, and there are those that are possibly there without the correct paperwork, if there is paperwork at all. So listen to what Govin Whittles says when they now are allowed the opportunity to actually get inside the airport.
When we got inside the airport, they processed us at the terminal through the immigration facilities, through customs, with lightning speed. They had dedicated specific queue to us, and they had sent a statement hours earlier claiming the people didn't have correct documentation that were on the plane. When we got there, they just picked up diplomatic passports, stamped them, move along, stamped them, moved along. But when we got to the hotel, we realized it was either that we weren't used to their customs or that they were just very hostile people. When we tried to buy drinks or at the bar or at the restaurant, you'd have to buy your stuff, pay for it, and then show your receipt to the waiter. Then they would come and serve you. Obviously, we felt that they were being racist. Through much of this, we felt that they were being racist. There was a lot of bad interaction. And then the cherry on the cake that really just confirmed that it looked like the authorities had it out for us was when we got back to the airport. Now we're preparing to go back home. Firstly, they made the head of the delegation, Wally Rueda, go through the scanner a number of times. But what was interesting, that when we arrived, there were about 2 people doing the checks for everyone. As soon as they realized we were the South Africans, a full team of 5 or 6 people came. And then our own Luyanda Dladla was a victim of what we think is racism. It definitely appeared to be racism. They made him go through the scanner. Then they told him, take off your shoes. So he takes off his shoes, but he questions them. Why am I the only one being asked to do this? And why are all of your body cams switched off? Because at that moment, the new delegation was switched off. They made him take off his shoes. As he did that, they pushed him and told him, hey, just keep on going.
They literally pushed him with a hand.
They pushed him from the back and told him, you need to move faster. Through, and we were asking, what is this about? Because at that point, he wasn't wearing any metal object. He had no metal on him, and it would continue beeping. And that just set off a heated exchange between the South African delegation and the Polish custom officials at the airport, where we accused them of racism, and they laughed at us and said that what we were saying was stupid, and just told us to keep going. And of course, I mean, the delegation from the PPS weren't pleased by this. They were flanking us. Luyanda obviously traumatized by this, but it just confirmed to us that they really had it out for us, and we believe we experienced raw, naked racism.
Gobin Whittles there in conversation with my colleague Stephen Crotus yesterday afternoon. Rebecca, I raise that because this is an account of one journalist. Now, in your piece, you make specific mention of News 24's Peter du Toit, one of the journalists on board the marooned plane, who wrote on Monday, and this is your quotation marks, he wrote on Monday, this was the headline of his piece, did the Poles discriminate against the airplane and its passengers because they from Africa, question mark, unlikely, close quotations. Peter du Toit is an editor. He's not just a senior journalist. He's an editor, Rebecca. How could he have missed this?
Holly, am I allowed to point out the blinding obvious here, which is that Peter du Toit is a white man? It's entirely possible he was treated differently. The stories that we're hearing are from black journalists and from black security officials. Stories of women, for instance, being strip searched completely unnecessarily. People being very invasively tested for drugs. This from a delegation coming from South Africa who had been in Warsaw for, a couple of hours. There's no justification for this treatment. And I'll tell you what concerns me, colleague, is that the only political party in this country that has called for a proper investigation into this incident is the Economic Freedom Fighters. Actually, this is a totally reasonable position. And I urge your viewers to think again about whether a delegation from America, from Britain, etc., would be treated in this manner. It's unthinkable. I mean, you honestly can't even make that picture in your head. And that is not to say that South African authorities probably did indeed make a mistake when it comes to whatever paperwork was required. I have no doubt that the logistical arrangements were a shambles. Yeah. But it blows my mind that there is so much defensiveness from commentators, from politicians in this country, in response to the idea that South Africa was treated in a racist and prejudiced manner here. And the other thing I want to talk about, if you'll give me the time, Polly, is about the issue of the volume of weapons and bodyguards on that plane.
Yeah.
So I wrote in my article today that something that is never mentioned, but which we now understand to be the case, is that the reason South Africa had so many more security officials than the other heads of state from Africa is because South Africa, as the kind of, the ones who are spearheading the mission, agreed to bring additional security backup to cover the other African heads of state, who were at various points supposed to be between 6 and 8 heads of state. That is a large quantity of presidents on a single mission, right? To an active war zone. An active war zone. And I've since been messaged by a couple of senior government officials this morning who said it's correct that in fact there were other African presidents who were keen to join the mission in theory, which obviously would have added to its impact, but did not do so because they were worried about the inadequate security. Imagine if Cyril Ramaphosa has persuaded these African heads of state to join him on a mission to an active war zone, and then something happens, right, to these other African heads of state. Imagine the diplomatic incidents that play out thereafter. It's also, frankly, this idea that just because they're African heads of state, I think, they don't deserve or need the kind of security detail that would, no question, be granted to heads of state from G7 countries.
Yeah.
The French Prime Minister, Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak. Why on earth would we be sending, a large quantity of the heads of state from Africa to an active war zone without ensuring that we have adequate weaponry? I mean, it's mind-blowing that people also seem so quick to say, oh, well, we didn't need that. We didn't need whatever they were carrying.
Yeah.
It's an active war zone.
Rebecca, I made this point to the police minister on Friday when I spoke to him, that had this happened, incidentally, to President Putin, if, let's say, he was coming to the BRICS summit, you can imagine the kind of security that is around him. In fact, the person who made that point this morning was the ANC's Deputy Chair of International Relations, Obed Bapela, who says, well, look, South Africa is obligated to arrest him based on the fact that we are a signatory to the International Criminal Court. And he actually makes the case that there's so many people around him that it actually would be virtually impossible that that would happen. So, and Pegitele, I think he struggled, to be honest, with answering this question, because I suppose where we have got to come to now is the diplomatic egg dance that South Africa has got to do now in trying to explain away this situation. You make it clear that Poland and the current regime there is explicitly racist. Should South Africa apologize to Poland for supposedly not carrying correct documentation, or should actually the inverse happen?
I think it's ludicrous. The very idea, as I wrote in my, the very idea that we should take lessons on morality and human rights from Poland, from this despicable far-right regime. I feel like this conflict is making us lose the plot a little bit, Polly, if I'm honest. Like, there's no world in which I feel like that is an appropriate response, even if we messed up the paperwork. The suggestion that this is some kind of a diplomatic affront to Warsaw, I mean, it's ludicrous. And furthermore, Polly, the other aspect of this that is also completely surprising and bizarre is how quick people have been to say the African peace mission was a disaster. Why? Because the bodyguards couldn't get off the plane. The bodyguards were not tasked with negotiating with Zelensky and Putin. Ramaphosa and his fellow heads of state went ahead, and they did that. They raised the issues they said they were going to raise. How do we know what impact that could have had? We don't. We absolutely don't. But for people to say, oh, well, that was so embarrassing, what a shambles on a global scale, on what basis are we saying this? There is zero evidentiary basis for that.
Rebecca Davis, and I suppose that's why you conclude the article by saying that there is intellectual dishonesty around how this mission has been interpreted or viewed. Thank you very much for your inputs. Rebecca Davis, a journalist with the Daily Maverick there. You can go and read her piece on the Daily Maverick website.